The Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General warns that undocumented personal identity verification cards pose a security risk. The VA's IG office found that none of the PIV cards tested met the security requirements. Michael Missal is Inspector General of the Department of Veterans Affairs. Michael, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
What does a PIV card give a contractor access to?
So a PIV card gives a contractor the same access that VA staff have. Two important areas. One is veterans' health care information, and the other is personal data such as Social Security information. And what we found was VA typically has about 30,000 contractors who do have PIV cards, as VA staff do.
And if those cards are not returned or aren't tracked, what could happen?
What could happen is those contractors or people to whom they've given them to will have access to this information, such as the healthcare information that I discussed, but they also would have access not only to VA property, but other government facilities. PIV cards are used across the federal government, and they typically allow access to many government facilities.
So what did the investigation find as to why the cards were not being documented properly or were not being returned?
So under both VA rules and federal acquisition rules, the VA is supposed to know who has the cards, and when the contract is over or they're no longer needed, they're supposed to have a record that they've returned them, that they've gotten them back. What we found, and we tested a number of contracts, that we didn't find in any instance they had an adequate list of those who had the PIV cards, and that they were sorely lacking in making sure that the PIV cards were returned. And this is a serious issue.
So how can VA leaders then ensure the accounting and documenting of PIV cards issued to contractors? Is there a system in place? Does there need to be a new system?
So we made 10 recommendations as part of our report. We said that VA needs to keep a list of who has the PIV cards. They need to ensure that the PIV cards are returned. They need to make sure there's oversight of the contracting officers who are responsible for the PIV cards given to contractors. There need to be controls in place. And VA should look at whether or not there's other systems that are automated that could do this without having a manual look at it. So we provided these recommendations to VA. VA agreed with the findings, but we were very disappointed that they didn't agree with all of the recommendations. In fact, they said it wasn't their responsibility at the Veterans Health Administration to do this, rather it was somebody else's responsibility. And when we pointed out that they had a regulation, a VHA regulation that required them to do that, they said they were going to eliminate that regulation.
Well, so then, I mean, maybe we don't need PIV cards. Maybe there's a better way to decide on who gets access to facilities and systems. I mean, did you look at that?
Yes, and PIV cards really are critical. Contractors do perform important responsibilities and roles at VA, filling in where VA either can't do it or doesn't have the necessary resources. So they really do need these PIV cards. And it is not that difficult. Again, across the federal government, PIV cards are used appropriately. And we provided what we thought were sensible and workable recommendations so that they get this right. So and we're going to keep monitoring this to make sure they do get it right.
So if it's not that difficult, then why the reluctance?
It's really hard to say. They didn't want to take on this added responsibility. And the leaders at the Veterans Health Administration said this should go to other leaders at the Veterans Affairs Department. We believe it's important for VHA to lead it since it's their responsibility. Federal acquisition law requires them to do so. They're welcome to work with other departments at the Department of Veterans Affairs to try to do it. But ultimately, it's VHA which gives out the PIV cards. It's their responsibility to get it right.
You know, Michael, the report recommends that final payment to contractors be withheld until all those PIV cards are returned and accounted for. Do you think that would happen, and how would that affect contracting at the VA?
Well, that should happen. Again, it's a pretty simple process here. They get a PIV card when they need it. They need to return it when the contract's over. When the contract is completed, there is a contract closeout process. Part of that should be to make sure that the PIV cards are returned. And under federal acquisition law, if it's not returned, then contracting officers do have the right and the ability to withhold final payment. So that was one of our recommendations in cases where PIV cards haven't been returned, which is a condition of the contract, that they should consider withholding final payment until they are.
All right, Michael, thanks so much for being on the program and for that report.
Thanks so much for having me.